Hello and welcome at Focustrap, a digital accessibility podcast. My name is Damen and I'm joined today by Jan Jaap de Groot, chairman at Foundation Apt, facilitator of the Mobile Accessibility Task Force at W3C, and co-founder and accessibility engineer at Abra. Welcome, Jan Jaap, in the studio. So nice that you can join us here. Always nice in the studio, of course. We have a lot to discuss, but I want to start with a question to you. Yeah, it's my signature question by now. What does digital accessibility mean to you?
Yes, good question. For me, I first started during my studies. So I studied software engineering. In my third year, I had a project about building an app for a company. And in my case, it was the Accessibility Foundation in the Netherlands that signed up. Or actually, they signed up with a project, and I agreed to work with them with fellow students. That was my first encounter with blind people, at least in a sense that they were able to use an app. So at first I didn't know that they would be able to use an app because I felt, oh, it's a touch screen. How would someone that's blind use it? And still, when I talk to people now, they are also surprised when I tell them that blind people can use, for example, an iPhone. Um, so then I really saw the challenges that they told me that a lot of apps are not usable for them. So then I really tried in this project. That was the goal, to make an app that was fully accessible for blind users first. And then secondly, for people that are not blind. So it's interesting perspective. And from there on, I just try to consider accessibility in my future projects. Yeah.
So nice. So this you were introduced with the topic on when you were studying, and came into contact with Stichting Accessibility already. Oh, that's nice. So they signed up for the project. That's where you.
And it's nice for me now that it's sort of full circle moment, because I learned from them, and now with my own company and foundation, we are working with them and also working at the same university that I studied. So now I'm giving a guest lecture there and workshops to also teach people, students, about accessibility there. So it's nice.
Yeah, that's nice. Nice direction they are taking. So there's more room to learn about accessibility as well over there. Which study?
It's nowadays it's called HBO ICT. So it's like a broader ICT direction, and the one direction I chose, well, back then it was called Informatica, or like informatics, I guess, or computer science in English. So now it's called software engineering. And then there's a specialization in the third year, and you can choose advanced mobile development, and it's still there. So it's almost 10 years ago for me.
Yeah.
But they still provide it, and they have part of this class, they have accessibility. So that's nice that students that choose that project have to do something with accessibility.
Okay. Interesting. Well, actually, today I just this afternoon I was at the University of Amsterdam at the front end um, bachelor study as well, and they also do a lot of things with accessibility. So that's really nice to see. Yeah.
It's nice.
Also, an assignment from the bank I gave them was also about accessibility. They even got some vulnerabilities for us from our website. That was nice. A nice feedback for us. Nice. And I announced you're doing a lot of different things. I think a really nice one to start with. Also, maybe the one you've spent a lot of time on, the Foundation Apt.
Yes.
Can you explain maybe a little bit?
Yes, that's when I started out, more my personal goal to share more knowledge about accessibility of apps. Because when I first started building apps, there was just lack of knowledge about apps. There's still not many resources about apps. I think Apt now, with our website apt.org, is one of the most visited websites, I believe, now about accessibility of apps. So that's nice to achieve that. First goal was just basically creating a resource that I was missing myself. Because if you want to make your app accessible, it's just very difficult to find how to do it. And so first we started in Dutch with apt.nl. And then I met Paul, Paul van Workum. He's also also co-founder of the Apt Foundation, and also now working together with me and my company Abra. So now we're together there as co-owners. And yeah, when we made the handbook, so free handbook, also sharing those at the universities to help students with accessibility. And I think most people know us for the code samples because we have now over 300 code samples for multiple platforms to really teach developers how to make apps accessible.
Mm. That's very nice. Are you more leaning towards Android development or more iOS development?
Yeah, difficult question. I started because when I was studying with Android. For me, it was also only possible because you need a Mac to start with iOS. And back then, as a student, I couldn't afford a Mac. So eventually, later in my third year, when I chose this subject I mentioned earlier, then I had some money, so I purchased a MacBook, and then I started also with iOS. Personally, I think iOS is better for accessibility. It's more easy, and Apple has had features for a longer time. So I would say I prefer iOS, but Android is catching up, and Android has it's more open system. So sometimes you can achieve things that on iOS you cannot achieve. So it's I like both, but
Okay.
probably iOS. I mean, I am more of an Apple user with my MacBook, iPhone, Apple Watch. So slight preference there.
Yeah. I'm also fully with you on the iOS side, but I also spoke with someone who gave me another perspective on Android accessibility development as well. Maybe you know his name, Quentin Bolson. He's big on Android, and he says there's a lot of detailed customizations you can do on Android that you cannot do on iOS. So you can go, if you know it, you can go into
Yes.
more depth with Android.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I know Quinton. He's very deep
Yeah.
into Android, very knowledgeable, and a lot of things you can do on Android that you cannot on iOS. So I think customization it can be better, and I've heard of people that have like severe motor impairments that they prefer Android because it just has more abilities to maybe emulate certain switches or certain actions. So you're customizable.
Yeah. But I think in terms of the default apps, maybe and default accessibility features, iOS
Yes,
takes
I
the
think
win.
most apps from Apple are
Yeah.
pretty accessible. I mean, not according to the web content accessibility guidelines, but according to their own human interface guidelines, they are following those.
You're also the facilitator of the mobile task force at W3C. Yeah. How's that? How's the facilitating going over there?
Yeah, it's going pretty well now. So I first was invited expert working on the documentation, and then I became last year, just a little bit over 1 year ago, became the facilitator. So I'm sort of in charge of leading the task force. At first, it was mostly recruiting some new people because we didn't have many active people. So now we have around 20 active experts contributing. So that's a nice achievement, but it was also challenging. How do I facilitate those meetings? And how do we work together? Which tooling do we use? How do we take decisions? How do we go through all the different success criteria? And how do we publish our thoughts? So there was a lot of first half year. I think we mostly spent just a little bit struggling, finding how to
It's
deal with
also
this.
building this framework on how we're going to collaborate
Yes,
together.
yeah,
Yeah.
sort of I call it the work statement. So sort of decide what are you going to work on and how are you going to do it and which tools are you using and when are you meeting. So it also took quite some time to find meeting time because we have experts from all around the world. So how do you deal with time zones? And also how do I make it just work for everyone? So now we are meeting. For me, it's a very good time. For some people, it's very early. For some people, it's very late. So we're now meeting at 3 p.m. on a Wednesday. So at least the Dutch time. So for some people in the US, if they're 9 hours behind in the West Coast, it's 6 a.m. So pretty early. And if people are maybe in China, then it's pretty late, like 10 p.m. But it's a time that works for most people. And some people don't join every week. But at least it's always for me during my work hours. So for me, it's a good time. And we have quite a few people now from Europe that are also in the task force. So for most people, that's why 3 p.m. works pretty well.
All right. It's actually so nice to hear about so many people from so many different countries collaborating. To me, that's what the internet is about. And
Yeah.
it's so nice to hear. So solving problems on the internet together over the internet. That's great. Yeah.
Yep.
And the discussions you guys are having, so you're basically translating the WCAG standards for app development.
Yes. So originally, and as a lot of people, if they know about WCAG to mobile, or it was previously called sort of Mobile Accessory Task Force Guidance. Now the new document will be called WCAG to Mobile, which is in line with WCAG to ICT, which is applying WCAG to ICT, so non-web and all kinds of ICT, including apps. What we are doing is WCAG to mobile. It's not specifically for apps, it's more mobile. But we are mostly addressing the challenges are mostly with mobile apps, because in the mobile space, if you have mobile web, in the past, it wasn't considered in the normal sort of a larger accessibility guidelines working group. So the one that makes the web content accessibility guidelines. At first, it wasn't considering responsive design, so they had a specific task force, the mobile accessibility task force, to deal with mobile. But now, mobile devices are used more than laptops to access the internet. So now they already consider responsive design. So we are not really focusing on mobile web now anymore since I took the lead. So now we're just mostly focusing on mobile apps, native apps, but also hybrid apps. So if they have a mix of like a web view inside an app, or maybe sort of web apps, those are things that might be a little bit different from normal sort of mobile web.
Yeah.
But those are things we are considering. But
And is then the line drawn using a browser on mobile versus using a native app?
Yeah, so what we are trying to do is sort of mobile applications, in the sense that they are applications running on a mobile device. And then mostly it means that they are running standalone. So it's just an app you can download from the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store. Then it's an app or mobile app. Otherwise, it's a website or like a web app. We're mostly considering apps that are sort of software in that sense, not websites. But software can have web content. And that's where it gets challenging, because how do we deal with a web view or web content inside another piece of software? So those are also some things that we are focusing on. But mostly native mobile apps, that's where most guidance is lacking, or most deviating from normal phrasing.
And the discussions you guys are having, how are these discussions going? So the discussions happen on GitHub?
GitHub is offline, or async as they call it. So people can just always contribute there. And we have weekly meeting that's using Zoom, so it's a 1-hour meeting. And then during the other days, we mostly work through GitHub issues. So we have one issue for each success criterion, plus an issue for certain definitions. And from there, we work together. So we're now at the large variation success criteria, so the ones that deviate the most from the app. So that's also for me the most interesting discussions, to see how people feel, and a lot of different perspectives from different people. Sometimes also different perspective depending on sort of the country they live in and which characters they are using. So if you may be using Chinese characters versus sort of English characters, it can also be different how you interpret certain guidance. Or if you read from left to right or right to left. So there's a lot of perspectives there, and trying to find common ground. So that's going okay. But it's a long process. That's why, creating a standard, or we're not creating a standard, but more guidance on an existing standard. But it's quite a lot of work. I think the nice thing is that if you make it happen, then a lot of people will adopt it.
Yeah, and you're telling that there's now a group of 20 people.
Yes, 20.
And because of these differences you just mentioned, is it also considered during the hiring phase, so to say, of the group?
Yes, we try to be balanced group, so not only developers, but we also have people that are more the product owner side or manager side, and also people that are maybe on UX or design. You have a broader perspective than just sort of the developers. That works pretty well. Yeah, you see a lot of different opinions, so it's working.
Okay, interesting. And what to you was the most problematic one? Is maybe not the right word, but the most challenging success criteria?
I think most challenging that we have had most discussion about are some of the criteria that are excluded in certain guidelines around the world. So, for example, in Europe, EN 301549 is the standard now for governments. And we have the upcoming European Accessibility Act, and they excluded certain success criteria, so not just one, but multiple, so 6 now. And
Do
we had
you
discussion there.
do you agree with these?
Yeah, now I agree, but when I was first, well, not only first, but when I was already quite into accessibility, I just didn't know the reason why they were excluded. I just felt like, okay, the European Union maybe decided that they are not applicable, but why? And now I know why. For example, in the chapter about software, which includes apps, they have replaced in WCAG to ICT, which is used in the European standards, for example, they replaced a web page with software. So they're going from a single page to like a whole application. And then they also have this clause called sets of web pages. So it's like multiple websites that are sort of maybe in a set, so maybe a collection of web pages or collection of websites. Sorry, collection of web pages is a website, but in apps it means you have a collection of software. So you have a collection of multiple software pieces with multiple screens, and then there are some criteria like consistent identification. So it means you would have consistent identification for icons in all your different applications, which it doesn't really make sense sometimes. And the same for navigation, that you need to have consistent navigation between multiple sets of apps. And it just, and bypass blocks is another example where you need to maybe skip multiple pieces of content. But that's also really for web, because for web you have usually the same navigation bar repeated. So if you have a large website, you can have hundreds of navigation links. So you don't want to use a screen reader and go through 100 every single time. So we have this skip link feature. But in apps, you don't really have skip links because the navigation is usually very small because it's only specific to that screen. So you have maybe 1, 2, 3 options. So swiping to the right to skip past is quicker than sort of swiping left and going to the skip link, activating it. So different in apps.
I see. And I was wondering, so there's the one that there is someone at the EU side who came up to skip on these success criteria.
Yeah.
Do you know who that? Do you know him?
Yes, well, not personally, but now I learned. So there's a GitLab. So they're using GitLab in the standard. So there's a GitLab which also has issues, sort of open source, publicly available. So from there, you can learn about issues for the EN standard and also contribute. You can just make an account there and comment. So I also play some comments because one of the times I actually, in this group, sometimes we do new findings. And I also found out that they made a small mistake in the EN standard with these 6 exclusions. So now in the new version, they are going to only exclude 5 because of the thing that we found in our group. So what's now going to be required is page title. Because page title is in web. A web page should have a title, so we would use the title attributes, like it shows in the tab of a website. But in an app, you would imagine this maps to a screen title, but it doesn't because they replaced a set of web page with a set of screens. But actually, they did not, because they mapped just a web page to software. So now they are going to make it applicable. So now it will read a piece of software must have a title. But that's just the software. So it means the app itself needs to have a name, not the screens. But you cannot publish an app if it has an empty name. So basically, we did achieve something, that we have now one less requirement, but basically every app will pass it because you cannot publish an app without having a title for the app. So it cannot be empty. So basically, we did achieve something, but it's not too much impact. No, so it's really about, that's because of this class that they mapped the web page to software. So now in apps, it's just about at the software level, the software should have a name, and the screens are still not required to have a name. But there's also a new thing that WCAG to ICT now has. They have a new version 2.2, and they added also based on our recommendation from our group a new note with a best practice that in software or non-web ICT, then it's a best practice to have a title for each view or screen. But they don't have the definition yet for view or screen, so they have some guidance there, but they haven't made it a strict requirement because they tried for many years to find a definition for view that would work for all kinds of non-web ICT, but they did not manage to do it because there were always exceptions. So they That's why they decided to then, okay, let's just map it to the whole software. But then, yeah, as a result, we have some other challenges now.
So I also want to talk about automation, of course.
Yes.
That's I think the main main focus point of Abra. Uh, how far are the automation efforts? How much is there to automate for mobile? Current.
Um, a lot less, unfortunately, compared to web. With web,
Yeah.
there's dozens of tools available that can do this. On apps, there's not that much choice. What is nice is that we have Google, which has the accessibility testing framework, which is also available through an app, the accessibility scanner app. You can download from the Play Store. So that's something you can use to check. They have, I believe, 14 rules, or 14 types of checks that they are doing. Apple also has this with the Accessibility Inspector, which has from Xcode. You can launch this and then also check the accessibility of an app. So they have 7 rules, I believe, 7 checks. And since iOS 17, Apple also made this available as an SDK or as an API. So as a developer, you can now in your sort of XC UI testing, that's a testing framework from Apple, you can also now use those 7 checks. And from Android, the testing framework you can also use. So that's sort of what's nice about Android, by the way, it's also open source, so you can actually see what they are doing. Because at Apple, it's just a black box, so you don't know what they are doing. What's annoying with Apple is that they have access to certain features that, as a third party, you don't have access to. Like they can enlarge the font size using commands, but as a developer, you cannot enlarge the font size. So they have sort of a unfair, no, not necessarily unfair, maybe unfair in, like you see in Europe, they are sort of closing down on this behavior that they say, okay, you're sort of having a, yeah, benefit that other people don't have. But that's what we're seeing in Apple and Google. Then you have some commercial parties. So one of us is Abra now, that we have our own automated testing solution. Then there are 2 other companies, and I will name them. So we have DQ and Events. Um, and so they also have tools for mobile automation, and maybe there are more, but those are the 2 major players that we are seeing. I guess together with us, we're still a little bit behind, I must say, because we started a little bit later, and we're still growing, but we are, I would say, catching up quickly. And we launched our first product, Abra Desktop, in I think it was August. So that is really a macOS app where you can then on your Mac connect your Android phone, connect your iPhone. It detects also Android simulators, iOS simulators. It's just in a drop down, select your device, select your app, press the play button. It installs our testing suite, and then you just press on the scan button, and it scans whatever screen is active. So it's really a really easy way to do app testing. So I think we are the easiest tool at this moment for testing, but we must still improve sort of the quality of our testing results, because we support then the Apple rules, we support the Google rules, so we embed those. And we now also have Abra rules, which I would say will have higher quality, and they will also align closer to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. I think that's one problem we are seeing, that Apple is testing against their own standards and Google is testing against their own standards and not against the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is part of the legislation. So companies can sort of conform to Apple, conform to Google, but still not conform to WCAG. So that's something that we are working on. And actually also, next week we will launch the first Abra rule, which is for orientation. And then shortly after, we will be releasing more rules, because we were spending a lot of time on the architecture. And now that that's there, we have a lot of draft rules, and we can just sort of finalize those and start releasing those. So, looking forward to next week to get the first feedback from there.
I can imagine. Well, it must be exciting moment. Something you are working towards for a long time.
Yes, a long time. Yeah, we had this idea a very long time. At first, we actually reached out to some of those, now competitors, to see if we could maybe just sell their product, because we know it's a lot of work to create your own SDK and your own rules, and a lot of edge cases. This is mostly my work is dealing with edge cases on all different scenarios. Uh, but that, they didn't really have an interesting offer for us. So eventually, we just decided, okay, what if we would do this ourselves? Can we do this? And we felt, we can do this. So we sort of invested our own time and money to achieve this. And now we're at the point that we're growing in size with more employees, and I'm really satisfied with how it's going, but it's as expected, a long road, but even longer than expected. But now it's nice that we have desktop ready. We have also a dashboard. So dashboard is where the data gets sent to, so you can work together with your team, with your organization, with users. So we have really sort of enterprise setup there. And then we're now focusing on the SDK. Abra Desktop, it's using SDK in our internal SDK, and soon we will also be publishing this SDK externally, so our clients can integrate the test also in their own automated testing, so they don't have to use Abra Desktop. They can just run it in their own sort of CI/CD pipelines, whatever. So that's going to be our next product. Yeah.
And when a test is run, you get a report about the findings, for example.
Yes. Yeah, so we SDK, well, because we're also trying to build for enterprise, sometimes they don't want their data to be sent to an external party.
Yeah.
So SDK, we can run it locally, so without internet access. So you can just process the results on device or in your own UI testing. So you just get, basically you just call abra.audit. You get a list of results for the screen that's active. Then you can do whatever you like with those results. It has like a result type. Is it successful? Is it a warning? Is it an error? Is it not supported? Is it something else? And a message, and you get like a snapshot of the whole hierarchy explanation. So you can process it yourself, but we also have the ability to add a second package, which is our Abra API package. So that's a secondary package you can add. And then it's another one line to do something like API.upload results. And then you upload the results to our dashboard.
Mm.
And from there, we have also the screenshot and just a UI around the data, basically. But you can also use it offline if needed.
Yeah, I can imagine that's actually a nice feature as well. The sort of monitoring as well.
Yes.
You can decide yourself if you want to upload. Coming up with new custom rule sets.
That's
Quite interesting part. But so do you use the WCAG for that as well, or is it also?
good question. Yeah, that is one of the more difficult things that we had to figure out, because for web there was this initiative. It's I think it was called WAI, or the Web Accessibility Initiative, and sort of tooling around. So they had a lot of funding from subsidies and grants to work on multiple toolings, including they worked on the ACT, so Accessibility Conformance Testing rules. So those, well, maybe you're familiar with those from for web. So those are standardized rules for testing on websites, but with the rule you want to be very specific where it applies to. So they are very specific to web. So they're really mentioning certain web elements and certain web components and certain web practices. So a lot of them are not applicable directly to apps. What we are doing is we're trying to align our rules with web content accessibility guidelines. We're also trying to adapt or sort of relate to those rules. But because apps are very different and also very different way of testing, especially on Android, you test completely different than iOS. With web, you just have, the HTML is the same on every browser. The testing is there much more consistent. So we had to make our own rules, and we did this because we are not only providing software, but we're also doing audits and training and a lot of other things. So we have a lot of data from our audits that we know what are common failures. So based on that, we are building our rules. So now we have, I believe, 75 rules that are based on our audits and on our knowledge of the ACT rules and everything sort of combined. And then we're trying now for those to make as many of them automated, because it's just now testing procedure, right? So now we need to automate those testing procedures.
Now, how much do you think can be automated?
Yeah, also a good question. I think there's been some research about this. I think for web, I think it's similar to apps, or maybe slightly less on apps. So I think around 20, maybe 30% can be automated. Because it also depends if you look at level A, double A, or triple A. Because at triple A, you can actually automate more, because a lot of those are now for sort of the cognitive target group. And that's something that AI can do pretty well to sort of decide if a word is difficult or not. So those are some of the requirements from AAA. So it depends which standard you're looking at. But with apps, it's still pretty low, 20%. So still 80% needs to be done manually. And that's actually also something we're working on. So it's something that we are seeing in our own audits, that not really time consuming to find issues. So we can open a screen, we can check landscape mode, check text scaling, we can find lots of issues very quickly, but then reporting those issues, especially uploading what we're doing in our audits is also providing a screenshot for every issue. So we need to make a lot of screenshots and then somehow get those from your phone to your laptop and then to your whatever audit tool you're using. So now with Abra Desktop, we're expanding it also with sort of semi-automated testing, as we call it. So then you can just press a button in Abra Desktop. It grabs automatically the screenshot, grabs a lot of data. It has like a drop down with the rules that we create. You just type the description, hit submit. And we do an API call to the dashboard, and it's just a lot quicker to then
Yeah, I can
do
imagine.
out.
It's a lot better workflow than what you described earlier. All right, awesome. And that's it in the first release as well, or that's already in?
That was in the first release. Also, a lot of things that are coming together now. So in February, we also released this semi-automated testing feature, plus then the orientation rule for Android, iOS, and also the Academy. So Academy is sort of e-learning, how you can actually fix those issues, because it's nice to find issues, but even better to fix issues. So that's what we're doing in our sort of e-learning trainings.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Fixing or preventing issues from
Even
happening.
better, yeah.
Yeah.
That's something we also try to do, but yeah, that's the best. Prevent instead of fixing, finding. Yeah, that's the best. Yeah.
All right. So coming up with new rules is a little bit different than for web, because most of the standards are web-based. The ACT rules are more web-based.
Everything is web.
Yeah.
Yeah, everything is web, and then you have Google coming up with their own Google interpretations.
Yeah.
And then Apple coming up with their own Apple interpretations, and they are not working together. So that's a really nice thing about W3C, which I've really come to appreciate, that they have one organization which is making the standards, and they work together with basically all large browsers to have a consistent behavior across websites. And that's something we don't see in apps. So it's not like Google and Apple are really working together to make standardized guidance. They have their own guidance. That's something we are sort of trying to do with the App Foundation.
Yeah.
But
It's hard.
if Apple and Google are not joining, then they're still going to do their own thing. So yeah.
The web doesn't really have shareholders. That's the difference.
Yeah, it's different. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've become to appreciate the web more and more. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine. But there are, I think, also a lot of challenges for web, for app, in that sense. So
Yeah, that's what I like. I like sort of finding or solving problems, and it's nice to do sort of groundbreaking work in the sense that you're doing something new or you're finding new ways to solve certain problems. And with web, it's a lot easier to find existing solutions. So that's something I like, but also it can be annoying if you have a certain problem and there's just nowhere on the internet to find a solution. And with web, it's usually easier to find solutions. So it's yeah, positive sides and more negative sides to it.
yeah, indeed. All right. Coming up is the European Accessibility Act, of course, this year. It's a lot of companies are busy with. Can imagine. From my experience, I know that we are, at least, but also from what I heard around me, is that a lot of companies are trying to catch up, making moves. Yeah, is that also something that you see?
You definitely see this happening. I think we see it even more now with the European Accessibility Act compared to sort of the other act for sort of public governments, or sort of the Web Accessibility Directive, which is more aimed at governments and sort of public sector. I think there less was happening now with commercial companies. Of course, there's also a lot more companies that are affected compared to like there's many more apps to the commercial companies compared to the government. The same applies to websites. So yeah, I think a lot is happening there. We see a lot of clients that come to us because of the European Accessibility Act. They want to avoid, getting a fine, because that's something that will happen now with the European Accessibility Act. You can not only get fined in one country, you can get fined multiple times in all European countries for the same issue. So it's really important, yeah, to start working on something.
I heard in Ireland you can not only get fined, but you can also go to prison.
Okay,
Yeah, that's
interesting.
one of their
Yeah.
that's in one of their legislations as well. Yeah, just learned this. Yeah. So it's quite interesting. Didn't check it myself, but I
When
heard
you be
it's
a criminal, you don't do
yeah, yeah.
accessibility.
I know a few people told me about it, so it's quite interesting. But yeah, it's of course the European Union. It consists of many different countries, so also different ways to implement or maybe fine or. But what you just said is that in different countries you can get different fines as well.
Each country has their own, how we call it, like observation in the government that is doing checks if companies are accessible, and especially if there are reports. So if users are reporting that they cannot use an app or a website, then this organization will then check if that's correct, and then check if they have like a program in place for accessibility. So what are they doing to solve it already, and or are they willing to solve it? And so they it's not really clear yet in the Netherlands, and a lot of countries are still setting this up, even though it's, I know, like less than 6 months now. So still a lot of things are unclear, even though it has been coming for years. But in the next months it will be more clear. But what I know, yes, you can get fined in every country because they have their own people monitoring. So if you have one app, you're like a global company and you're active in a lot of every European
Yeah, which
country, then
probably you are.
yeah, the bigger brands, they are definitely
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. Mm. So, if you were to assess like company readiness for this for the European
Yeah.
accessibility, what do you see around you? Do you think a lot of organizations are ready this year?
No. Well, I mean, it depends what ready means. Like, I think for the European Accessibility Act, it's a little bit different from the Web Accessibility Directive. So it's mostly about making progress. So it's not about being like fully compliant, which is also not the main goal of Web Accessibility Directive, but it's sort of the end goal. And European Accessibility Act is a little bit more flexible in that sense, that it's more about just you need to work towards becoming more accessible. If you can show the progress, and you can show you're maybe following trainings, maybe you're doing testing, you're doing audits, then you're also showing you're fixing issues, then it's likely you won't get fined. So I think companies are now taking those steps. But if you want to be like 100% accessible or fully compliant, very few. I know it doesn't really exist. Like it exists for a couple minutes, right? So sometimes we do audits and then you have maybe a lot of failures. Then we do a re-audit. You have less issues. Then another re-audit. You have a couple issues. Then final re-audit. Then you have zero issues. Then we give like an audit. Okay, you have zero issues. But then the next day, another developer pushes another change, and then suddenly it breaks. Really, accessibility is not never done, and you cannot really get to 100%. I mean, you can get to it in one point of time, but you cannot keep being at 100% all the time. It's just not realistic.
Not realistic. No, no, not definitely not in a big organization. I would say with every minute new pushes to production.
I think that's what you mentioned. That's, I think, why automated tools are very important. That's what we hear a lot from people that really want this, and a lot of people are using it for web, but not really for apps because there's just less options, and options are very expensive. But it would really help if you, like you said, if you have a commit every couple of minutes or even every minute, then if it can run some automated CI/CD checks to prevent something inaccessible being pushed to production, it really, really helps. That's something that we are also trying to contribute to.
I think that's a really good case because also the from the top 5 main issues, I think a lot of them actually can get automated. So
Yes. Yeah, it's interesting that like you asked me the question earlier, right? Like how many percent can it find? So you can find 20% or something of the like total issues. But if you look at the percentage, it can be maybe 80% because from the 20% that we can find, they are around 80% of all issues that we find in our audits. Like, for example, name, role, value, and I guess also state is part of that. It's 4, even 8 rules that sort of are connected to that because you can say, okay, it has to, the name cannot be empty. That's one rule. The second rule can be the name must be correct. The same for role. You can say, okay, the role must not be empty, the role must be correct. So you can basically do already 8 checks, and you can find so many issues in apps because in our audits, just 4.1.2 is sometimes 50% of all the issues. So if you can only find name, role, value, and state issues, you can find like 50% of an audit automatically. Yes, automated tools can find a lot of the total issues, but still the more complex ones you cannot find. So still manual testing is needed, but you can save a lot of time with automation.
think one of the I've read up on one of the articles by DQ. They also mentioned this in their.
Yeah, they have the most amount of data, especially I think their research is mostly always based on web with X. So X is their product, which is also open source, and it's used by a lot of tools. I'm not sure if I would call it a problem, but a lot of tools exist on web, but most of them are just a wrapper around X. So in the end, you're getting the same results with a different skin, basically. That's also part of the project I talked about with the ACT rules. They also made sort of a second engine. It's called Alpha from Site Improve. So we have also Alpha. That's another accessibility engine, also open source, to check for issues. So it's sort of a competing engine with X, but X is by far the most popular. I believe they said they have like 1 billion downloads. And it, of course, it gets counted multiple times for for projects or something. I'm not sure how it works with those packages, but they are, at least they have millions of users basically. So it's a lot of impact.
Even Lighthouse is mostly Axcore.
And they also use, basically almost every tool is based on X because they are just the best with the amount of rules. So it's really difficult to build yourself.
Yeah, now I remember some like 2 years ago I made this meme. It's terrible to explain a meme, of course, but it was about this guy floating in space with the astronaut behind him holding the gun to his head, and it's always has been all these different tools surrounding him, and then he discovered it's all Xcore, and then this guy,
off his hood or something,
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
who
yeah.
are you? And then it's just Xcore.
Yeah.
I've seen
Because
this
there's
around.
so many different variations, and of course. But I think it's good because if you have like linting and you have unit testing and functional testing, integration testing, these are different stages where you can test your software in different contexts. So you actually get better result when you use them all combined in a good way than where you not to do it, for example. But
it's really nice. And it's really easy on web. So basically for every type of project you have, whether you have a React Native or sorry, not React Native, but there's just React on native, but you have whatever framework you're using, someone made a wrapper around one of the accessibility engines to make like a one line of code to check accessibility. A lot of easier to get started on the web with accessibility, at least the automated part.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. A lot of organizations, we discussed it, are. Well, I think it's the European Act. I think it's a good thing because also I think it has the ability. Well, it already shows that it is doing this to open the eyes of some big organizations to take it more seriously. And what I hope is that this is the kickstart to where they also keep considering accessibility throughout the development life cycle. Basically, create standards around it, create processors around it to preserve the quality. But what do you think is a good accessibility strategy for a big organization?
I think the main thing that we see with our clients or the larger clients is sort of training is a big issue. You also mentioned it is, you have maybe 100 or hundreds, or maybe some organizations have thousands of developers working on the same web, or you have multiple websites, multiple apps. And then every month or every week, there's almost starting a new developer. And most developers haven't learned about accessibility during their studies or during their work. So if they then join an organization that is working on accessibility, they need to be, learning. So I think training is really important to immediately when they start at your company to learn about accessibility. So I think what works best, and I'm opinionated, of course, is e-learning. That's why we also are now building e-learning, because people can just do it on demand when they start a job. Just go to e-learning, earn a certificate, and sort of show they have basic or sort of advanced knowledge. So I think that works. And like I mentioned before, I think automation can help to. I think automation is used for a lot of things already in mobile and in the web to catch issues, just accessibility, but all kinds of issues. So it can also help for accessibility to catch issues. And then I think it's really important to also really consider the user, because a lot of companies, they don't do user testing, or when they do user testing, they don't specifically do it with users with disabilities, but just people they can find maybe more easily. I think it really helps to do user testing find users with disabilities, the broader perspective, and see how they are using your app. Because WCAG also is just technical standard, and it doesn't account for a lot of user needs, so it's not perfect. So always, users can find a lot of things that are wrong with your app that would pass in WCAG.
Yeah, yeah, no, indeed. And yeah, luckily, a lot of user tests are done at the bank, also with people with disabilities. But these research are more done by UX designers. I have to say. Bridging this gap from doing the research and testing with users, I think it's not really something that a lot of engineers do.
No,
But do we
no.
maybe have some tips for how to, or maybe even how to integrate like these reporting results of a research into engineering
Yeah.
practices?
At least what's something we are doing with Apt, and this also sometimes is mostly to convince sort of the stakeholders or companies to do something with accessibility, was our research. It was done by Q42 about accessibility settings. So we have on Apt a page with statistics about how many people use certain statistics. So this can get an idea of maybe which tickets or which features should be prioritized. Because if you see a lot of people are using maybe dark mode, then maybe you should consider it. I think that can be a way to sort of get data from users without actually talking to them. Have to be careful there because it can be sort of sensitive data, right? If you're tracking if someone is using a screen reader, it's maybe likely to be blind. So have to be careful there to make sure you get consent, or do it in an anonymous way that you cannot track which user has which settings enabled. So I think that can help. You can also do it in your own app, of course, just sort of analytics, but still you get, like, we have a percentage, for example, for voiceover, and it's like 0.002% or whatever. It's really, really small. So if you look at those numbers, it's really small. But if you calculate 0.02% times in Netherlands, like 17 million people, it's still, I believe we have like 30,000, 40,000 people that are blind. So in numbers, very high. So don't look blindly at percentages. People themselves, even if one user struggles to use your app, it's still worth to sort of improve your app for them. And my recommendation for developers is to go out your probably comfort zone and maybe join one of those user research sessions. You can really learn a lot.
It's not only, I think that was my perception at first as well, but I think also building an accessible app also brings a lot for abled people as well. I think brings a more understandable app overall, um, and which comes with a lot of benefits as well.
Definitely, I think what we're seeing is a lot of features that we are using daily are coming from accessibility needs. For example, dark mode is now no longer under accessibility in the settings. It sort of moved to now just a sort of normal setting, sort of a screen setting. But originally, dark mode was also meant for people that maybe cannot, be really sensitive to light. So they really need a dark mode. Otherwise, they would just get a headache really quickly. And now it's more common for people that spend a lot of time behind their computers to also use dark mode for less eye strain. But for some people, it's really necessary. But for other people, it's just, I like it when I can use dark mode. But for me, if it's light mode, I can deal with it. But
Yeah, some people are even arguing that it's environmental cause, the dark mode, because some screens now, if they're dark, then the lights turn off completely. So then you spend less energy on dark screens.
yeah, that's it's true. And I think you see it with certain screens, like the AMOLED or certain types that basically turn off the pixels.
Yeah.
Yeah, what we're also seeing is captions. That captions are, originally made for people that are hard of hearing or deaf, but now a lot of people just use it for other reasons because they maybe forgot their headphones, or they are multitasking, or they just find it easier to read text than to process like audio. So yeah, you can really see that. I think there were some statistics from Netflix that I think like 50% of all users were using once a month or more captions. So it's really yeah, big impact.
I use captions all the time. I love it. Yeah, because sometimes you just don't. The audio sometimes it's talking really loudly, but sometimes not an.
It's not clear
I,
always. Yeah, I have a lot of
I
times also
always have.
captions
Yeah,
on. Yeah.
It's great. All right. I think we have great conversations. A lot of topics discussed. Are there some topics that you would like to that we missed maybe that you would like to bring up?
I think we covered a lot. I did a lot of talking.
Yeah.
Do you have any topics or any insights?
Well, maybe about more let's look a little bit more in the future. How do you think the future of accessibility is going to look like? Do you see some notable trends maybe some AI? It's of course the daily.
Trending, yeah. I think AI is promising. I think it can really help to sort of enhance the percentage of issues you can find automatically, and also sort of fix, like we're seeing now people generate captions automatically. We see people generating transcripts, generating image descriptions. So that helps, but still AI can sometimes miss the context or get things wrong. It still needs a human to correct it, but it can be quicker. So you can make more things accessible in less time. So that's I'm all for that. I think I hope the European Accessibility Act will be like a GDPR. Every company sort of has to think about, okay, privacy, okay, in this case, accessibility. How am I going to deal with this? I have to do something with it. Like a lot of companies, they still don't do much with GDPR, but at first they were really trying, especially the large companies. They are in trouble because they can get fined, and the smaller companies, they can usually get away with it. But the larger companies, they have to do it, and they have the most impact. So if those apps that are installed by millions of people are becoming accessible, it's just so much more impact. So I really hope it just affects a lot of people who at least consider accessibility. I hope they do something with it. Like everything they do is a win, and hope they strive for fully accessible. But that's challenging.
Yeah, same. No, definitely. And I think maybe something nice to share. So I think a lot of companies are now trying to catch up with the EAA, maybe also a little bit of stress. So some people are also trying to take advantage of it a little bit, but I think taking small steps every day can be daunting, right? Accessibility, a topic many people do not know much about. Accessibility, digital accessibility. But just making small efforts every day will get you a long way already. And not seeing it as a project, but seeing it as something you just need to integrate into your way of working, into your development lifecycle, into your way of creating software. Is I think the most sustainable way to make sure your app will be accessible in the future. And that's I think what the EAA is all about. It's not making these big steps until the end of June, but actually more. So you can see it more, no, not as a starting date, but hope not. But taking it into the future.
Yeah, I fully agree with what you said. I think it's just a process. You just have to keep accessibility in your process, and it's never ending. Just like a lot of other topics that you just always have to account for. Accessibility is one of them, and for some companies it will be new. Some it will be maybe more emphasizing accessibility. Yeah, I think future looks bright.
Yeah.
Looking forward to see what will happen. And I think a lot of companies are now, like you mentioned, sort of starting out. I think around June, some companies are finally going to start doing something. We saw the same with the governments that, let's be accessible. Yeah, it was announced 5 years ago. And now they're finally starting. But I think,
I was noticing the same thing. It sort of gets reignited into
we see a lot of focus now on the European Accessibility Act. We just see a lot of, like us, like a podcast. We see a lot of companies promoting it. You have to be careful there. We see some, sort of the cowboys that are now seeing, there's a business opportunity. So be careful what people promise and if they can actually deliver and if they do have the knowledge or not. Because I've seen a lot more companies just popping up and selling accessibility, even though their own website, for example, is far from accessible. Even though, I know it cannot be 100%, but you can just see significant flaws. Then you know what you shouldn't do business with them. But people that want these services, they don't know because they need help. So they don't know how to check if someone is actually credible or not. So that's something will be challenging.
Maybe also a lot of talk about the overlays
Yes,
as well.
overlays.
Yeah.
Yeah, so be careful for sort of overlays and
Yeah.
plugins and sort of one line of code and one plugin that sort of make your whole website fully accessible.
Mm.
Not possible. Sometimes they can enhance it, but a lot of times they actually make it worse. So,
Yeah.
I don't like them usually.
No, me neither. Well, some of them are always it's not the fully you will not get fully
It's mostly
accessible.
the marketing
Yeah.
around it.
Yeah.
They market if it's like a one fix to everything.
Yep.
Because a lot of those companies, they're sort of selling insurance, right? Sometimes they sell the solution and they say, oh, if you get sued, we will cover it. So you're sort of paying insurance as a subscription. So they're sort of insuring you. That's at least in the US what I'm seeing. So that's sort of a tactic they're using there. Like, okay, you can use our overlay, but if you get sued, we'll just, cover up to X amount. So it's sort of like paying for insurance instead of making yourself an accessible website or app. So I hope we won't see this in the EU. I know there's already been statements also from Dutch government and also from other parties that overlays are not the solution. And they can be a valid first step. And if the marketing is valid, it can be useful, but oftentimes they exaggerate what they can achieve.
Yeah. Taking the most sustainable way is I think the way to go. Training, automate as much as possible.
Yes.
And try to take small steps every day and try to really integrate into the way of working and the way the software is created. And in each step, try to consider accessibility.
Yeah, and I really hope people are starting to complain also to maybe the vendors. So we see a lot with websites, right? No code is now also now coming to apps that use no code. At least you don't write code, and they usually write not the greatest code they're generating, especially not accessibility wise. So I really hope those platforms are also now, because they sometimes have millions of customers, that they start complaining. Okay, but the result is not accessible, because if that platform can make those components accessible, suddenly they can have so many impact. So there's a lot of potential, but it can be difficult to reach the right people at those larger organizations.
Yeah. Also, most of the time, these are like big legacy systems that it would take a lot of investments to do. So there's also I've seen the results of some of these low code tools as well, and mostly diffs coming out of it.
Yep, same for apps. It's just a view and
Yeah.
looks like a button. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. All right. Thank you so much for joining us, Jan Jaap. Where can people find you online if they want to follow you or the
Yes.
things that you do?
Well, easiest is probably my own personal website. It's janjaap.com. Happy I managed to buy a domain at some point. And our company website for Abra is abra.ai in English, or abra.nl for the Dutch version. For Apt, we have also English and Dutch, so apt.nl for Dutch, and apt.org for the international one, which also is also in Dutch. And W3C, Certain Global Accessibility Task Force. You can find it there. Also, if you may be interested in contributing there, you can always consider applying as an invited expert to join, or maybe if your organization is already part of W3C, you can just ping me there, and you can get added straight away to the mobile task force if you are knowledgeable. So yeah.
Awesome. Be sure to reach out if you're considering joining or opening a discussion. I think always welcome. Also to the listeners, if you like what we do, please consider subscribing, rating, or liking, or even commenting. It's always nice to get some feedback. Much appreciated. Thanks for listening. Thanks for joining, Jan Jaap, and thanks for all the work you are doing surrounding accessibility. I think it's a very nice big list, which all serves, I think, a really great purpose. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks,
I hope
Tim.
to see you. I hope to have you on another time as well. I think we can go on for a few more hours as well. I think great topics.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for the invite, and looking forward also to the other episodes.
Yeah, thank you.